My name is James Hinds. I lived from December 5, 1833, to October 22, 1868. At the time of my death, I was a U.S. Congressman in the state of Arkansas. That is, until I was assassinated. I was shot in the back by a member of the Ku Klux Klan. For helping the formerly enslaved to vote, and I advocated for them to be able to go to school. And now, 154 years later, the Black Ancestry Network Group is going to tell you my deep story.
James M. Hinds was born on December 5, 1833. He was an American politician who represented Arkansas in the United States House of Representatives for the 2nd Congressional District on June 24, 1868. Hinds was born and raised in a small town in upstate New York. Hinds traveled west when he was 19 and graduated in 1856 from the Cincinnati Law School in Cincinnati, Ohio. He then settled in Minnesota, where he opened a private law practice and was elected district attorney of his county. Hinds was building a career and starting a family in St. Peter during a turbulent time in the region because of conflict between settlers and homesteaders and the Dakota Sioux, culminating in the Dakota War of 1862. He enlisted as a private in the 1st Minnesota Cavalry's Mounted Rangers, Company E, during the conflict. Hinds hoped that St. Peter would become the capital of the new state of Minnesota. By early 1865, however, he realized that the town was destined to remain a small farming village. Seeking a fresh start and more opportunity, in 1865, he relocated with his wife and 2 young daughters to Little Rock, Arkansas, in the throes of Reconstruction. And in 1867, he was elected to represent Pulaski County as a Republican at the Arkansas Constitutional Convention. The convention was tasked with rewriting the Constitution to allow Arkansas readmission to the Union following its secession before the Civil War. At that convention, Hinds successfully advocated for constitutional provisions establishing the right to vote for freedmen and for public education for both black and white children. While in Arkansas, Hinds became acquainted with a man named Joseph Brooks. Brooks was a Methodist minister, newspaper editor, and politician who served as the 19th postmaster of Little Rock, Arkansas, from 1875 to 1887 during the Reconstruction period. Between 1864 and 1874, Brooks and the Brindle Tails, a faction of the state's Republican Party, led a coalition group in an attempt to overthrow the Republican governor, Elisha Baxter. The 1874 coup d'etat attempt came to be known as the Brooks-Baxter War. Brooks leased a cotton plantation near Helena, Arkansas after the American Civil War. He helped organize freedmen and tried to recruit them to the Republican Party. He was a delegate to the Arkansas Constitutional Convention of 1868. His faction was nicknamed Brindle Tails because it was said that, when Brooks spoke, he sounded like a brindle-tailed bull. In the 1872 gubernatorial campaign, both Brooks and Baxter ran as Republicans. In 1874, continued disputes about the validity of the 1872 election of Ulysses S. Grant prompted the Brooks-Baxter War. Brooks had put together a militia of more than 600 men and took control of the State House in Little Rock, where he declared himself governor. Baxter gathered about 2,000 men to fight the supporters of Brooks. Federal troops were stationed between the two forces after an armed conflict and intervention from President Ulysses S. Grant. Brooks was removed from office. That same year, however, Grant appointed Baxter as the postmaster of Little Rock, Arkansas, a patronage position. Ulysses S. Grant faced numerous challenges during his presidency. The Civil War had recently ended. The transition to Reconstruction altered the direction of the country, especially the lives of the formerly enslaved citizens. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments ended slavery once and for all, and extended U.S. citizenship to the formerly enslaved, with equal protection under the law, and established voting rights for black men. Black Americans also attended school, established their own churches, became politically active, and held political offices at the local, state, and federal levels. They were overwhelmingly members of the Republican Party, largely due to Republican abolitionist support for emancipation and civil rights. As these dramatic changes were taking place throughout Southern society, many white Southerners resented this newfound independence among black Americans, and rejected the Republican Party. Some turned towards violence, to maintain white supremacy, and topple Republican rule in the South. And President Grant needed to find ways to curb this violence. The most well-known violent white supremacist group to rise during this period was the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan had a rather debatable origin. It was formed in Pulaski County, Tennessee in 1866, by 6 Confederate veterans. They say that these men were bored with civilian life, and founded the Klan to mainly play pranks. But history now reveals the true nature of this terrorist organization. As the Klan spread throughout the South, its members' intentions became insidious, calculating, barbaric, and violent. Klan members attacked free people exercising their new rights, as well as abolitionist white Republicans, who supported them. Their methods included burning black schools and churches, intimidating black and white Republican voters, and even resorting to the rape of black women, and cold-blooded murder. Klan members often wore ghoulish disguises, and committed unthinkable crimes at night, terrifying their black victims. Worse, the Klan's goals were supported by local officials, as well as law enforcement, which meant that Klan murder was rarely prosecuted at the local or state level. Klan activities threatened to undermine federal Reconstruction efforts in the former Confederate states. Therefore, Republican governors and officials appealed to President Grant for help if local and state authorities were unable or unwilling to. James Hinds found Arkansas, found the former Confederate state, heavily degraded by the Civil War. The economy and labor system, which had relied upon slave labor, was in shambles, and fighting between Confederate and Union forces had led to a population decline, and the loss of millions of dollars worth of property. As with many Northerners, Hinds did not understand the depth of the Southern resentment toward black Americans and Northerners. He believed that in the wake of the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War, and the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, freedmen in the South should enjoy the same liberties as the citizens in the North, and underestimated the continuing fierce resistance from white people, who had sided with the rebellious Confederate nation. Sentiments were later eulogized by Logan H. Roots, a contemporary, who represented Arkansas in Congress. Hinds found himself referred to as a carpetbagger. This is a derogatory term, used by resentful Southerners, to disparage Northerners who moved to the South during Reconstruction. In mid-1865, in Little Rock, Hinds formed a law practice with Elisha Baxter, one of the state's leading Unionists. Baxter, who fought with the Union Army during the war, would be selected to serve on the Arkansas Supreme Court by the newly established government, and he became the governor of Arkansas. In October of 1867, James Hinds was elected a delegate at Arkansas's 1868 Constitution Convention. At that convention, he was made chairman of the Committee on the Elective Franchise. The new constitution that emerged that February, which was ratified in March, provided voting rights for black males over the age of 21, and for the creation of public schools for both black and white children. Elected to Congress early that year as a Republican, Hinds went to Washington, D.C. in April 1868, where he arranged for Arkansas to become the first state to rejoin the Union under the 1867 Reconstruction Acts. In May 1868, Hinds was a delegate at the Republican National Convention held in Chicago. When Hinds returned to Arkansas in August, he campaigned vigorously for the Republican presidential candidate, Ulysses S. Grant, and for civil rights for the former slaves. While campaigning, Hinds was threatened and targeted by the Ku Klux Klan. And on October 22, 1868, 2 months after coming from Chicago, while traveling to a political meeting with Joseph Brooks in Monroe County, James Hinds was shot to death by a Klansman. Near the village of Indian Bay, in Monroe County, a man shot Hinds and fellow Republican politician Joseph Brooks in the back with a shotgun. Brooks managed to stay on his horse and ride to the event to bring back assistance. Hinds was knocked off his horse by the shotgun blast to his back, and lay on the road until help arrived. Before he died, Hinds wrote a short message to his wife, and identified his killer. He died about 2 hours after the attack. A coroner's inquest identified the shooter as George Clark, secretary of the Monroe County Democratic Party, and a local Klansman. George Clark was never arrested or prosecuted. A week after the attack, the Morning Republican newspaper published the story, recounting that men passing and returning soon found Mr. Hinds lying in the road, still alive and rational, and conscious of the fact that his wound was of such serious nature that but a few moments more remained of his earthly career. Arkansas Governor Powell Clayton feared that the murder of James Hinds, coming amid rising violence against Republicans and former slaves, was a precursor to a general attack on state officers to seize control of the government and the polls prior to the election, and initiated military action against the Ku Klux Klan. The insurrection did not take place. James Hinds was buried near his birthplace at Evergreen Cemetery in Salem, New York. The Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., contains a memorial stone in his honor. History has all but forgotten about the brave white men who put their lives on the line to help the formerly enslaved populations gather their footing as new citizens of America. These men should always be remembered for the sacrifices they made, at a time when doing so not only jeopardized their lives, but also the lives of the formerly enslaved populations that were navigating their lives in a hostile environment. If it were not for the abolitionists that sought after political positions and victoriously took control of Congress, and while in Congress they utilized the power of their offices to bring forth legislation that historically was never considered before, such as the Confiscation Acts 1 and 2, which gave power to the military to confiscate slaves as contraband and utilize them in the war effort. The Homestead Act of 1862 provided 160 acres of federal land to anyone who agreed to farm the land. Congress also signed into law the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. The Reconstruction Act was 4 statutes passed during the Reconstruction era by the 40th United States Congress, addressing the requirement for the Southern states to be readmitted to the Union. The actual title of the initial legislation was an act to provide for the more efficient government of the rebel states. It is unfortunate and despicable that so many had to give their lives, before, during, and after the Civil War in order to force rebellious people to respect the ideals of the Founding Fathers, that all men are created equal. The Black Ancestry Network Group would like to honor the elected abolitionist officials of the 37th, 38th, 39th, and 40th Congress, and also the formerly enslaved that became contraband and enlisted to become United States colored troops, and also those who took political office, for making the sacrifices required that made the United States the nation it is today. For without them, this history could not have been told. James M. Hinds was the first U.S. Congressman ever assassinated in office. He was murdered on the eve of the 1868 presidential election, which was a contest over civil rights and suffrage for freed slaves. Racism is a school of thought that is taught behind family walls, and all who graduate are ignorant of life, liberty, and justice for all.